Well, let's get started. I'm Joe Bardwell, Chief Scientist at Connect 802 Corporation. Connect 802, we've been around since 1994. We started in the wired world with the Network General Sniffer in that environment. I remember the day that Priscilla Oppenheimer, some of you may know Priscilla, that Priscilla came in with her Apple computer and said, "Look at this software that I've got that runs on my Mac," and it was some ethereal, some protocol, Sniffer protocol it was. And so from that day, Wireshark has come a long way in these many years since then. And we transitioned into the wireless space in 1998-99 with the full transitions, so that we are a wireless network integration company. Design, sell equipment, install it, troubleshoot it, and use Wireshark. So what we're going to talk about today, it's a case study. Very simple. And like case studies go, I'll tell you what happened, and I'll tell you what we found that was wrong. And like so many troubleshoots, what you find is when you get right up to the point where you figure out what's wrong, well, it's sort of anticlimactic, because it's like, oh, well, this is all. It wasn't, it wasn't some rocket science. It was just, how did we discover what was wrong? And in the course of that, I'll take side trips and talk about wireless network technology and try to give you a perspective on what happens in the development of a wireless network design. What are the protocol issues? What are the kinds of things that I'm going to look at? How am I going to become comfortable doing protocol analysis in the wireless space with Wireshark? And we'll weave that up into this troubleshoot. It was 11 p.m. and 15 network engineers, 5 from Cisco, 5 from the customer, 5 from us, 15 engineers. We were in the conference room, and I'm looking around because I did this same presentation on Tuesday.
Same way, right?
Same one, exactly the same one. Exactly. You're well. It's like a good movie, right? Terminator.
Thank you.
You got to see it a couple times.
I'm waiting for the sequel.
Yeah, we're waiting for the sequel. So this is exactly the same thing. And afterwards, on Tuesday, 3 guys came up and went, "That was you." They were actually part of this entourage. They were aware of it. So, and I said, well, that's good. At least I have properly sterilized this, so it's not obvious who even the guys that were there had to go, halfway through I realized you were talking about our company. I said, yes, that's right. So, and in the end, all the finger pointing was resolved by looking at a Wireshark trace. And that's where we're going to go. So the background, we were contracted to do the design, the spectrum analysis, to do the post-installation verification with a prime contractor that was bringing in what at the time, which was November, December last year, the largest Cisco 802.11n deployment, over 5,000 access points in over 100 buildings between Singapore and California and Kentucky, and it was huge. It was huge. And it was 11N for Cisco. This was their new Cisco, the 11N access point. A lot of new things. We did a lot of testing. Rigorous engineering. Because, doggone it, this was a huge opportunity for Connect 802, and we didn't want to mess up. So we were so careful. We did the on-site testing. We created a 3-dimensional RF CAD model, which is something we do as part of wireless design, using the Wireless Valley software to do 3D RF CAD modeling. We did coverage predictions. We confirmed the design, and the pilot network went in, and the report was it didn't work, which was really scary. When I got that call, what the heck? The wireless LAN controller showed that all the access points were operational. They were all up. So we couldn't fault the cabling guy. We wanted to, but throughput testing confirmed that for all the access points, sort of at random, about every 3 minutes, they would all go down for about 20 seconds. Drop the connection, which was not a good thing. And if you know who he is, then you know why the title of this session is Wireshark Saves the WLAN. If not, to figure it out. You have to know that you know what you think you know so you can know how to know what you don't know. How do you do this troubleshooting? There's stuff that you know about 802.11. And maybe it's not always applied every day, but in a troubleshoot, you have to know, be sure, you have to be confident that you have the knowledge of what you think you have knowledge about. You have to know that you know what you know, so that you can know how to know what you don't know. And that's where the visibility in the network that packet level analysis brings in, where you're looking at Wireshark, you're looking at packet flow, and you're seeing what is actually there. I remember showing someone a trace file once, and they looked, and I forget, I can't, I'll make something up, whatever it was, DHCP wasn't getting a response, or something as obvious as that. And then they looked and they said, no, that's not right. And of course, it's not a question of not right. This is what it is. It is like that. I'm not. It is. It is what it is. So the design process, as we led into this, and this goes back to any troubleshoot. You have to. You're going to look at Wireshark, and whether it's wireless or wired or whatever, in order to understand what you're looking at. Is it good or bad? Well, it depends on what the specifications and requirements for the project are. Obviously there's a level of bad that's bad no matter what. But if I'm doing a wireless network to support wireless voice over IP, the requirements for that network are much more stringent than if I'm providing web and email access to people in a hotel, for example. So what is bad for the wireless voice over IP network could be very good for the people in the hotel. So careful quantification of the equipment and then project specifications, because Wireshark is going to tell you things about the network performance. You're going to look at the packet level behavior. You're going to understand things about performance and operation on the network. And many times, whether those things are good or bad, right or wrong, are dependent upon what the manufacturer's specifications are and dependent on what the requirements were that were stipulated for the project. I was saying in this project, we wanted to be so anal retentive about these designs. It's got to work. Got to work. We're going to have a big network. Did a three-dimensional CAD model of the building. This is a software that does an RF predictive model, so we can create virtual radios and move them around in the space. And then we went out on site and confirmed. We call it a calibration survey. We confirmed that our predictions were correct. We put the Cisco access points up on tripod stands and walked around. And one thing we found, this is a picture of one of the walls in one of the buildings that was under construction. And they were going to put drywall over this. And these are metal strips on the wall. And the purpose for that in all of these buildings, and I was serendipitous that we happened to see one of the buildings that was under construction, because you would never think that all the walls on both sides of the wall were lined with strips of metal. RF signal propagation, unexpected. What these were for is they were going to come back and hang bookshelf units on the walls in all the offices and research lab facilities. And so to hang these units on the walls, they needed something to anchor to, as opposed to just hollow wall anchors in drywall where it would pull out. So all the walls had this metal stripping in it. And we were very glad that we discovered such a thing. And we also made very careful point to make sure that all the stakeholders were on board with the system. And that part of the design process, when you have to come back on a project and try to explain why something went wrong, if all of the stakeholders are on board with all of your upfront methodology, then there's a lot less of that look that's like, yeah, what did you do wrong? Say, but at least they know you've done this design. You've been very diligent, rigorous engineering, and that way there's more of a team effort in dealing with a troubleshoot, because all of the stakeholders are on board with the design process and what you've done. We also did spectrum analysis, which is another component. Someone in the Tuesday presentation asked a really good question. They said, what other tools do you use besides Wireshark? And one of the tools is the Cognio Spectrum Analyzer, which was Cognio, and it's OEM'd by Air Magnet. It's the Air Magnet Spectrum Analyzer, which about a year and a half ago got acquired. Cisco acquired Cognio. So now it's the Cisco Spectrum Analyzer, which is the same as the Air Magnet Spectrum Analyzer, which used to be the Cognio Spectrum Analyzer. And it's so much the same, and we've got old Cognio cards from like 4 or 5 years ago. We can take it and stick it in a computer that's running the Cisco version of the software. It's the exact same software, just different logos on it for Air Magnet and Cisco and the old Cognio version. So a very functional spectrum analysis in the Wi-Fi space. And somebody asked a question about, what about Wi-Spy? Anybody using Wi-Spy? And Wi-Spy, the biggest advantage of Wi-Spy is it only costs $100.
Yeah.
And Cognio is $4,000. And there is a big difference. Wi-Spy will let you observe the presence of interference and noise. But the granularity of the spectrum analysis in Wi-Spy is such that it is an identification tool, but not it lacks as a spectrum full-blown spectrum. It's not a full-blown spectrum analyzer. And Cognio isn't an $18,000 Anritsu either. The difference is this: with Cognio, you can see signal reflection problems if you are so inclined to look with a spectrum analyzer. You can see a signal reflection. With Wi-Spy, you cannot see the signal reflection. And with Anritsu, you can see the signal reflection and how many nanoseconds it was from the wall to the point of reflection. Much more than you would need. But Cognio is a spectrum analyzer, whether it's Cisco's version or Air Magnet's version, it's the first step into true spectrum analysis. Prior to that, get Wi-Spy. Go buy Wi-Spy for $100. It'll let you see that there's a microwave oven that's blasting your wireless network. And so we use those tools. We also use the Air Magnet Survey Pro to make nice colored heat maps. Walk around and post-installation verification to make heat maps. But for protocol analysis, yes, question?
Is this posted online?
It will be.
Okay.
It will be. It will be posted.
That building is familiar.
That one? So, because we use Air Magnet Survey Pro, we run Air Magnet on all the engineers' notebook computers, and it shows us signal strength. A nice graph of signal strength. But whenever we do packet analysis, we save a trace that we may have captured with Air Magnet, we pull it into Wireshark, because the filtering and data manipulation capabilities in Wireshark, in my opinion, are much better than what you see in Air Magnet. So it's convenient for us, because we got the Air Magnet card in there. We're using Survey Pro to make the nice colored heat maps. If we have to capture something, fine, we capture it. But anything that's packet level analysis, good old summary detail hex. It's been a mainstay for 20 years. 20 years? Wow. More than that, yeah. Good old summary detail and hex. Okay. So we got a project going. Knowing what you know, the full spectrum, and that's a pun, by the way, the full spectrum of things. But I'll be addressing much more of the presentation to this part of the room. You have to understand how RF issues can impact the wireless LAN. How many of you have done things like the CWNA or the new Cisco CCNA wireless, some training certification? And those are good things. That's where you get that knowledge. And you read books, and you hear rumors, and you read about aliens in Area 51 in Roswell. Emanation. And now you could use that. So what's wrong with the wireless network? I believe there may be emanations from the planet Venus that are causing this problem. Because sometimes it's as bizarre as that. We put a network in on the 6th floor of a high-rise office building and used a network system that allowed active countermeasures for security. So if you were not authorized to associate to one of the access points in the network, you were actively blocked. The access point sent an 802.11 disassociation request to the client that was attended. And by the way, that's great in school systems. They love this stuff as a feature for a wireless LAN controller because the student is sitting in a classroom and the student is supposed to be doing a research project or doing some web research, whatever, and they're looking at a video on some chemical formula or something, and what we don't want is we don't want the student to connect to the local Starbucks across the street and be looking at artistic imagery on the internet. We want to block them. And so active countermeasure says if a client device that is visible to the access point attempts to associate to a foreign or rogue access point, block the client. It's cool. Very cool. And this was very early on when this countermeasure stuff came out. It was probably 5-6 years ago. And after a few weeks, the customer called and said, the law office on the floor above us came down and said that their wireless network had stopped working. Oh yeah, I didn't think about that. Because of course, when they tried to access their own access points, they were visible, and so they were a visible client accessing a rogue access point. You got to understand stuff about RF, and we'll talk a little bit about this today, various things, and the most fundamental thing to remember is that an antenna looks like a fluorescent light tube, if you want to think of it that way. An antenna, dipole antenna, that's the stick, as opposed to a directional antenna that's something else. The signal comes out the sides. It does not come out the top or bottom. If you remember pictures or you did it yourself in science class, you took a bar magnet under a piece of paper, iron fillings went like this on the paper, and it made sort of the field. And that's fluorescent light. That's where the analogy. So when you think of an antenna, you can think of it sort of beaming out like a fluorescent light and nothing comes out the top or bottom. And you go, oh, I don't know about that, Joe, because I had an access point. The antenna was right over my head, and I was sitting right under it, and you're telling me nothing comes out the top or bottom, and I'm sitting right under it, and I have great connectivity. And that's true, because that curve, that curvy field, you don't get to the point where it starts to visibly separate until you're 15 or 20 feet below it. And by the time you're 30 feet below it, it's measurable. And when you put one on the ceiling of a 60-foot aircraft hangar, nice 9 dB antenna, and you stand on the floor directly below it, there's a 20-foot diameter circle where there is no measurable signal. I learned that the hard way.
What about reflections?
In general, if reflection is your only connectivity for Wi-Fi, it's a bad thing. Now, by the way, if reflection is your only connectivity for WiMAX, they talk about NLOS, non-line of sight. NLOS, non-line of sight connectivity, where I can connect to the signal that has diffracted, knife edge diffracted around the edge of a building or reflected off of another building. So there are technologies that can recover fully a reflected signal to some degree. And there are technologies, 802.11n, MIMO, there are technologies that can benefit from signal reflections as well. But 802.11 Wi-Fi doesn't like signal reflections. So we learn all this stuff about RF. And that becomes our foundation, the bedrock of it. Now we have to understand 802.11 protocol behavior. And this is where Wireshark comes in, because the best way to understand 802.11 protocol behavior is to confuse yourself by just capturing from a normally operating network. You boot up your notebook computer while you're capturing. Boot up your notebook computer, associate, log into the network, go out and browse a web page, stop the capture, and then go back and look and see what happened. And each time you look and see what happened, and you go, okay, why did it do this? Say, then I see it did this. There's this EAP thing. What's that? Extensible Authentication Protocol if you were connecting to Radius. Or there's a authentication, but it's way up here in the trace, and I'm really not authenticating to them down there. And why is that? It's because there's 802.11 authentication, which was a nice idea that never came to fruition. 802.11. By the way, how many of you know why it's called the 802 Committee? You know why it's 802? So you're going to think I'm making it up then if you don't know. It's because the committee was formed in February of 1980, and that's how the IEEE names committees. 802, February 1980. And all of our standards, 802.1 for bridging and infrastructure, 802.2 logical link control, 802.3 Ethernet, 802.4 gave rise to ArcNet, 802.5 token ring, IBM token ring. I had a student in a class, we did a week-long class, had a big section on token ring and Ethernet and other technologies, and at the end, in the student evaluation, they wrote in the evaluation that they really learned a lot about Ethernet and TCP/IP, but they felt that the token ring discussion was sort of irrelevant because they didn't use token ring, and they understood that IBM token ring, the token ring was a technology that was going away, and they felt that token ring should be minimized in the class. And every time in their evaluation, every time they wrote token ring, they wrote this.
Yes.
Token ring. You can't make this up. So I'm sure they were listening, and I'm talking about 802.5. That's token ring. Yeah, token ring. Got it.
Maybe they're token too much.
Yeah, token ring.
They were talking in a ring.
802.6 metropolitan area networks, fiber rings up to about 30 miles in diameter. .7, I don't remember. .8, I think. .9, 10, I don't remember. 11, 11. 802.12, wireless regional area network. Nope, that's 22. 22 is the next one that's coming. 802.22, wireless regional area networks, RANs, W-R-A-N, WRANs. And wireless regional area network is the promise of 10 plus megabits per second over 5 mile connectivity. It's the competitor to LTE and CDMA 2000 and WiMAX. It's the next 802.22. Yeah, that's WiMAX. 802.16 for WiMAX.
802.20 is
Right, and 22 is the WRAN. Right. 5 years from now, we'll start hearing about vendors who are starting to talk about products, and within 10 years, we'll hear about 802.22. Just like today, we hear about WiMAX is here. 5 years ago, it was a discussion, and so today, 802.22 is a discussion. 5 years from now, we'll be here. But always, you can't violate the laws of physics. I've tried. It doesn't work. And Wi-Fi right now is high speed, 802.11n, 225 megabit per second TCP/IP throughput in the same room. And that's going to grow. But meanwhile, if you want gigabit wireless between two buildings up to a mile apart, that's here right now. You can have that. It's not cheap, but you can have it. And as you start getting longer and longer distances, we could do 3 megabits per second up to about 5 miles with some of the new WiMAX gear. See, something's got to give. If you want more range, you reduce the data rate or you increase the power. So as these technologies evolve, will there be a wide area technology like a cellular or a WiMAX kind of technology or a 802.22 wireless regional area network? Will there be a 20 or 30 megabit per second version of that someday? Sure, but at that point it's going to be 10 gig wireless to the desktop from the in-building device because all of the technologies improve in their speed. That's the answer to the person that says, well, Wi-Fi, even 11n, 300 megabit per second with 200 plus megabit per second throughput, but aren't we going to catch up to that with some of the new cellular technologies in 5 years? Maybe, but by that time we'll be talking about gigabit coming from the wall in the building. So they all move along together. So we look at these protocols that are running on top of this layer 1 stuff, whether it's Wi-Fi or WiMAX, there's protocols that run on top of it. 802.11, the basic behavior is that a client device listens to see if there is an access point in the environment. That access point may or may not be advertising its SSID. SSID is the service set identifier. And actually SSID, that's what you see when you view available wireless networks, is the SSID. And technically, that is the extended service set identifier, the ESSID. The BSSID, the basic service set identifier, is the 6-byte MAC address of the access point. But in conversation, we say, well, that's the SSID, the network name. Technically, it's the ESSID. So an access point could be advertising in a beacon frame every 100 milliseconds. It could be advertising its SSID, or we could have an access point in stealth mode, operating in silent mode, which means every 100 milliseconds it still beacons. It just has a null string in the field for the SSID. But it still beacons. The client device realizes there is an access point out there. The client device can then either go, oh, hey, it's an access point that I was looking for because it's a visible SSID. On the other hand, if it's a stealth, if it's a silent SSID, then the client device will send a probe request which says, are you big Wi-Fi network or free public Wi-Fi? You ever seen that one? No. Don't log on to that. And if you do, don't put in your password. So, but I do understand that the Nigerian government is offering a recompense now. Anybody who's been spammed gets $1,000. You just send in your credit card information. So I send a probe request, and that means that even if I have a stealth access point, all I have to do is look with Wireshark, and I see there's a beacon. I don't know what the network is, but it's beaconing. I can't see the SSID. I watch until a client sends a probe request. Then the access point tells the client who it is. Then I know what the SSID is. So it's only stealth for people that just have Windows or Mac and they don't have any tools. It's only stealth for the OS. It's not stealth for Wireshark. The client associates. Association means this. In each access point there's a table of MAC addresses of clients. And if you are associated to the access point, your MAC address is in that table. And it's because, let's say there's 3 access points in this room. When I transmit a packet going back to the server or going back to the router, all 3 access points see that packet. But only the one to which I am associated will then re-encapsulate that 802.11 frame into an 802.3 Ethernet frame and push it out on the Ethernet network. The other 2 will drop the packet. So association is the process whereby one of many access points decide that they are going to be the one with the MAC address in the table, and they're going to forward the traffic back onto the Ethernet network. After I have associated, then I issue, as a client, I issue an authentication request. And it's silly. See, the original 802.11, there were a couple of mistakes that the 802.11 committee made in the 1990s. One of them was that they knew that they couldn't export certain DoD protocols and encryptions. So to avoid the problems with export restrictions on technology, they made their own encryption mechanism called Wired Equivalent Privacy, or WEP. And we know how good a job they did with that. Oops, that didn't work. And it was then partly at Cisco's urging that the federal government relaxed some of the trade export restrictions on encryption technology to allow WPA, Wi-Fi Protected Access, and WPA2, which is Advanced Encryption Standard, AES, to actually be part of the standard. And that was only because now those levels could be exported. So they made a mistake on the encryption. They also made a mistake on authentication. They were clever. They wanted to build authentication into the protocol as a basic part of the 802.11 protocol. They said, okay, fine, we will use a shared key encryption mechanism. What we're going to do is if you have the right key, you will be able to encrypt this random string that I'm going to send you. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to send you a string. You're going to encrypt the string and send it back to me. And if you encrypt it correctly, then you are authenticated to the network. Unfortunately, that meant that the clear text version of the string was sent to the client, whereupon the client used the secret key to encrypt the clear text and send it back. So now I have the clear text and the encrypted string, and they overlooked that fact. So you will see that without exception, the 802.11 authentication process is always set to open system, meaning no authentication. Now that just means no authentication relative to the 802.11 protocol standard. Certainly doesn't mean no authentication. You're going to authenticate later with radius or with a user ID and password or something else. But just so you know, association and authentication are two behaviors that every client will go through as they connect to the access point. But the authentication behavior is this silly stuff that ended up, they just set it to open system. Once I'm associated, connected to the access point, now I'm going to see possibly EAP, Extensible Authentication Protocol, where I'm doing radius authentication. How many of you have configured radius authentication? Inner and outer EAP types. And how late did you stay up doing that? Sometimes late.
How early did they get up?
And how early did you get up? Yeah, it can be. It is possible to develop a radius authentication system where the clients and the radius servers and the overall configuration is dramatically complex. A simple one, it could be simple. A complex one, has anybody done radius with Secure ID with the card that has the digits flipping on it? So that one's a little more complex to do wireless radius authentication with that. So in any event, here's Wireshark again, where we're going to look. Now, the first thing is this. What you may end up doing in a troubleshoot is you may end up turning off encryption on the wireless LAN so that you can just see all of the data in Wireshark without having to worry about anything being encrypted. That way you can see inside your EAP packets. Otherwise, you're just going to see that it's EAP and you look inside and everything's encrypted. So, but nonetheless, just like I said, you might have done a CWNA or CCIE or CCNA wireless or some other training class for wireless to get this part of it, RF issues. There's certainly lots of, there's things to learn. Never, so once if you stop learning them, then there'll be new ones. They'll invent new ones then. But the basic behavior we're going to look for to see if everything looks normal is we very well may be looking at DHCP, and that may be VLAN related. Different DHCP scopes for different VLANs. So I can do an SSID to VLAN mapping in the access point. I could say if you associate to this SSID, your frames are going to be tagged with VLAN 101 in the 802.1 PQ header. And if you associate to this, so if you associate to the trusted VLAN or trusted SSID, you get VLAN 101. If you associate to the guest SSID, you get VLAN 102. If you associate to the VoIP SSID, one that says my company VoIP users, whatever, because it's going to go back through the SIP gateway. And that one is VLAN 103. At which point it may be the configuration of your network that you have different DHCP scopes for each VLAN because of routing requirements. It may be that later on in the firewall, the different VLANs go off in different directions. In any event, DHCP and the possibility of VLAN, radius authentication, and captive portal. Captive portal is that thing you get at a hotel or an airport where you turn on your machine and you get the T-Mobile login or whatever. It's a captive portal. What it did is, as your machine, you opened your web browser, and your web browser went to resolve the fully qualified domain name of your home page. And the controller captured that DNS query and sent back the IP address of a web page that is the login web page. That's why it's called a captive portal. And it gave you that. Then when you authenticate it or you put in your credit card, whatever, now that you've gotten through the captive portal, or it's also called a gateway controller or hotspot gateway controller or access controller, comes by various names, does the same thing. Once you have authenticated through the captive portal gateway, then it redirects you to the originally requested IP address. Or it redirects you to some silly advertising page, depending on how brazen the owner of the network wants to be. In any event, these things happen. And after those things happen, now it's just TCP/IP troubleshooting. Now it's just normal stuff. Yes, question?
So once you authenticate with OpenAuth, do you then do EAP right afterwards, or basically?
Yes, you do EAP right afterwards. Well, DHCP first.
DHCP first, then
Yeah.
EAP. Okay. So if you do DHCP and you fail EAP, you still are associated.
Yes, you're still yes. If you do DHCP, you're connected, you're associated, and you get your IP address with DHCP, but you fail EAP. Yes, you are still associated to the access point.
The access point is just saying you can't go anywhere.
That's right. That's right. You can't go anywhere.
Some APs will knock you off.
That's right. And some depends on the wireless LAN controller. Some APs will knock you off at that point. Others will leave you associated but blacklisted. And this is where all those pieces come together, because you're going to capture from the network with Wireshark, and you're going to look at it. It couldn't be more complicated. It couldn't be easier. You're going to look at it, and as you look at it, you're going to look into detail in the frames and follow what's going on. Now, in an 802.11 network, a fundamental behavior that is present is that every 100 milliseconds, and that is configurable, and it can vary a little bit, but 100 milliseconds is close enough. They'll never see the difference from Berkeley here at Stanford. Every 100 milliseconds, the access point sends out a beacon frame. The beacon frame, there are a couple of fundamental things that a beacon frame does. One is it announces the existence of the access point, which, as I said before, may or may not have the SSID included in it. The other thing a beacon frame does, which is unrelated to really a lot of what we're talking about here, but it is a fundamental aspect of a beacon frame, it has to do with power save mode. I think that whoever came up with 802.11 power save mode woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning and went, I got it! Here's how I'm going to do it. There's a bit in the header, which is the power save bit, and when I, as a station, as a client device, I am configured to enter power save mode. So when I send my last wireless packet of this transmission, I set the power save bit in that packet. Following which, I shut the radio down completely. I power it off. It's gone. It's not in like some low power mode. It's off. When the access point receives my packet, it says, this station, Mike is now in power save mode. So from now on, the access point, I will queue all traffic destined for Mike. I put in a buffer. Now, 100 milliseconds goes by. And we all know, because all of us who were associated, we being client devices, we're role-playing hardware now. If you're associated to the access point, every beacon frame contains a timestamp. And we time synchronize with the access point. So the wireless driver is time synchronized. Every 100 milliseconds, the timer is updated and synchronized. So you are time synchronized with the access point. So when you sent that last frame and you went to sleep, you know when the next beacon frame is going to come, because you have been timing that. And so you are asleep. The radio is shut down, but the driver is counting it down. And it's not that far off. Because the timer we're talking about microsecond values, and the timer is counting milliseconds. So you only have to be within 10% of the time to be right. When I know that, when Mike knows, Mike's the client, when Mike knows that it's about time for the next beacon frame to come along the line, he turns the radio on and starts listening. Now, meanwhile, as the access point, I have a thing called a traffic information map in the beacon frame. It's a bunch of bytes. Each bit in the TIM, the traffic information map, each bit represents an associated station. And so when you associate, you learn that you are bit offset such and such in the TIM. That's your bit. You get the beacon frame, you look into TIM. If your bit is set, it means the access point has queued some traffic for you, which means you now stay powered on. The access point then sends you the traffic. What a clever thing. A very clever thing. And you can see all this stuff happen when you look into detail in the frames. And I know technology, right? This is supposed to be big. We haven't been able to figure out. I had the AV guy in here. Something with my computer. It's not the projector. It's not the network. I don't know. But we look in here. So, for example, another thing we might see. See, here's the retry bit. this frame is or isn't a retransmission. Now that's something to look for in Wireshark, because if I see a lot of retransmissions, I suspect that there's noise or interference in the environment. 802.11 retransmissions are analogous to Ethernet CDMA CD retransmissions. If I had an Ethernet collision on an old coaxial Ethernet or on a hub, if I had a collision event, I could have one on a switch, but less likely. Then we know that 802.3 Ethernet, there's the exponential back-off algorithm, where the client backs off, waits a random amount of time, retransmits, sees that as a collision, and changes the back-off time, and so on. That same kind of process operates in 802.11. When I send you a data frame, you send me back an ACK frame. Now the difference between wired Ethernet and wireless, one among many differences, in wired Ethernet, the transmitter has the ability to detect the collision event because they are wired together. Originally that was on a coaxial Ethernet. I saw the electrical signals that mixed it up on the coax. In a twisted pair environment, while I am transmitting, my transmit port is transmitting on the transmit pair to the switch. While that is happening, I receive data on the receive pair collision event. But the point is, in a wired Ethernet network, the transmitter is able to detect the presence of a collision event. And CDMA, exponential binary backoff, I retransmit the Ethernet packet. In a wireless network, the transmitter is not able to discern what happened somewhere else. Laws of physics. I transmit the signal. And the fact that it got corrupted over there because of a microwave oven, my signal went out hundreds of feet away because I have this transmitter. And 500 feet away, there's a microwave oven that's blasting everything within a 100-foot radius, which is not atypical. Certainly an operating microwave oven within 10 or 15 feet, bad. Within 30 feet, not good. Within 100, 150 feet, introduces corrupted data. Still run. You can still run. But if you're within 15 or 20 feet of an operating microwave oven, you don't expect consistent operation on the network. Question, comment?
Is there a way to mitigate the risk of microwave? Because it seems like many buildings.
Is there a way to mitigate the risk of microwave oven? Yes. Don't put the microwave oven on the countertop directly under the access point that's on the wall. Okay, that's rule one. If I walk in your building and I see, and next time you're in a hospital, I hope you don't have to be in a hospital. Okay? If you're walking down the hall in a hospital, there are 50 microwave ovens for on the counters in the hallway to heat things up for the patients. And you look, and the number of times that the microwave oven is on the counter and the access point is directly above it, mounted up against the ceiling. Yeah, that's rule number one. Keep the microwave oven away from the access point. Other than that, there's really no way to mitigate it. Oh, by the way, that's not true. If you're within 50 or 100 feet of a microwave oven, stay down on channel 1. And you will have to, because the microwave oven, by the way, microwave oven does not heat food with microwaves. It heats food with electromagnetism. The magnetron, what's that thing in a microwave oven? You know it's called a magnetron? It's not called a microwavetron. The magnetron uses an alternating, very powerful magnetic field to vibrate the water molecules in the thing that's being cooked. And it's the vibratory action of the water molecules that causes the heating. A byproduct of that is that there are microwaves that happen to be produced. But to cook with the microwaves, they have to be at about 10.5 gigahertz to hit the resonant frequency of the water molecules. And then they would cook with microwaves. So we leave that to the Soviet government and the U.S. Embassy. Cook them with microwaves. No, microwave oven cooks with electromagnetic energy. The byproduct of that, an unintended, unavoidable byproduct, is that around channel 9, in the 2.4 gigahertz ISM band, there's a burst of microwave energy that comes out, and it basically covers, channels 8, 9, 10 are pretty well blown out, 7, 11, pretty bad, all the way down to channel 6, You'll see spikes on channel 6 from the microwave. You won't see anything on channel 1 unless you're literally 5 feet above the microwave. If you're 15 feet away from the microwave oven on channel 1, you won't see the microwave oven. It's a high end of the 2.4 gigahertz band. So, mitigate on channel 1. Side point to that is you go, well, what about, I got channel 1, 6, and 11. I'm doing 1, 6, 11, 1, 6, 11. It's channel play. And if you tell me I have to use channel 1, I'm going to have 1 and then 1 in this part of the building. And you know what? It may well be the case that having 2 access points on conflicting channels, because they don't, we talk about conflicting channels. It's not like they don't conflict. They just have to share the error. Because if I'm transmitting on channel 1 and you see me and you want to transmit on channel 1, you defer. So it's not like you just walk on top of me. So I have 2 access points. They're both on channel 1. If one of them's transmitting, the other one has to wait. Now there are some other issues in there, but fundamentally what you lose is capacity. When you have 2 adjacent access points on the same channel, you lose capacity. Yes, there are some interference issues, but the biggest thing you lose is capacity. So you have to decide, in a lot of microwave ovens, you have to decide, do I lose more capacity because of the microwave ovens, or do I lose more if I put them all on channel 1? We had the company, and this is their corner of their warehouse. And in this corner of the warehouse was the break room. And these were like 10-foot tables. So the break room could hold, 80 people. Big break room. Huge warehouse floor. And along this wall, there were shelves like this high, with microwave ovens in each cubby. 40 microwave ovens. So when the bell rang, and everybody went in to take their break, they all fired up the microwave oven, and that break room became, literally within 150 feet of the break room, nothing operated above channel 6 when all 40 ovens were operating at the same time.
Exactly.
So in this corner of the warehouse, we put the access point here on channel 1, we put it here on channel 1, we put it here on channel 1. Because at least they would continue to operate when the microwave ovens were on. Otherwise, if you put this guy on 6 and this guy on 11, it would just zap them out. So it was a trade-off. There's no optimal solution to that. But the real mitigation is get off of 2.4 gigahertz. Go with 5.8. You'll like it better for 11N. Because 11N, you'll be able to use 40 megahertz channels in 5.8 gigahertz, which will double your potential for throughput. And you won't be able to do that in 2.4 because there's not enough 40 megahertz space. You can only do one 40 megahertz channel. So for home use, 2.4 gigahertz, 11N, it's a beautiful thing. One 40 megahertz channel. All right, maybe 2. So yeah, 2 40s and 120. That's right, yeah. 2 40s and 120. So again, all these behaviors manifest themselves in ways that are visible when you look inside the frame. And we could spend all week talking about it. But that's where you capture with Wireshark and you look inside, and this becomes your course syllabus to go and do web research and go and look it up and call somebody. And what the heck are all these things? Okay, so beacon frames. The first thing I'm going to do to look at any wireless network is I want to get a sense of the general normalcy of the network. It's like you go to the doctor, they take your temperature, they take your blood pressure, and those are the two. The nurse comes in. Temperature and blood pressure. You basic behaviors here. I look at beacon frames. First of all, I can look at the radio tap header. Beacon frames are always transmitted at the lowest data rate for the air standard. Pardon the little squishing here on this. Lowest data rate. So 802.11b, it's 1 megabit per second. BG mixed mode, it's 1 megabit per second. If I configured for G in Greenfield, only G, which nobody does. I don't know of anybody that does, because that means you refuse to support 802.11b clients. But if you did, then it would be 6 megabits per second for the beacons. A is 6 megabits per second because 5.8 gigahertz A, that's the lowest data rate, and so on. GN mixed mode is 6 megabits per second for the G, and so on. So the beacon frames are always transmitted at the lowest data rate. So what I know is, that's why Wireshark knows this is an 802.11b channel, that's correct, 1 megabit per second. Now, you could stipulate in the configuration of the access point that connectivity would not be allowed below 6 megabits per second. And what that would mean is, as a client moved away from the access point, they would drop off more quickly. They would be dropped more quickly. They wouldn't hold on down to 1 megabit per second. But nonetheless, the beacon frames are still going to be 1 megabit per second. All right? So I look at the beacon traffic, and I get a sense of what's out there. Also, the beacon traffic, I look in the radio tap header, and I can see the signal, and I can see the noise. And that is the signal and the noise that were discovered during the receipt of this packet. It has nothing to do with what happened out there, because laws of physics, you can't measure what's out there. You can only measure the effect of the electromagnetic signal inducing a current into the antenna in your device. And there's an interesting thought with that. Suppose that I have a network and I happen to be connected to an access point that's 800 feet away. Not unreasonable, outdoors, across a parking lot, whatever. And in the middle of that parking lot is an 18,000 volt transformer vault. Okay? And I'm standing directly opposite the transformer vault. So that all of the signal that's going to get to me has to pass through the electromagnetic field of the transformer vault. Okay? It doesn't affect me at all. None. Now, if I were standing in the transformer vault, it would affect me because the electromagnetic field would be inducing a current into my antenna. But the fact that the signal goes through that interference doesn't do anything. Photons are massless particles. It doesn't knock the signal apart somehow. The fact that there's a signal that's propagating to me, it gets to me. The fact that there's a place in the middle where there's another electromagnetic signal that would completely distort me if I were standing there, it doesn't do anything to the transmitted signal. It still gets to me. And what we're seeing here is what I see. It doesn't mean that between me and the access point there aren't other issues that if I were standing somewhere else I would see something that was a bad thing. Now, when you look at that, signal strength. If you're greater than minus 65 dB milliwatts, that's great. And that's mathematically greater. So minus 60 is greater than minus 65. Minus 50 is greater than minus 65. Numerically, mathematically greater. And by the way, dB milliwatts, this is like miles and kilometers, sort of. The dB milliwatts is a logarithmic measure, and milliwatts is a linear measure. So 100 milliwatts, if I want that in dB milliwatts, then it's 100, and 100 is 10 to the second power. The exponent is 2, and that was too big a unit, so they multiplied by 10. 20 dB milliwatts is 100 milliwatts. And 10 dB milliwatts comes down to, what's the hard one? 1 dB milliwatt is 10 to the first power, which is 10. So if you take the milliwatts and you go to your scientific calculator, you take milliwatts and you hit the log button, and so like if you do 30, log of 30 is 1.479. I only know that because 14 dB milliwatts is 30 milliwatts. 15 dB milliwatts. So this is a logarithmic measurement. And minus, anybody remember what a negative logarithm is? It's a fraction, yes, less than 1. So negative logarithm just means it's a fraction. And so when you say, you say, I have a radio that can receive down to minus 90 dB milliwatts. Well, if you wanted to say it linearly, you would say, I have a radio that can receive down to 0.000000009 milliwatts. Yeah, it's the same number. It's just we use this logarithmic thing. It's like scientific notation, sort of, in a weird way, because there's too many digits to the right of the decimal place for these little tiny signals. And if you think about the fact that a cell phone can communicate down to about minus 130 dB milliwatts, that's a lot of zeros to the right of the decimal point in order so engineers use dB milliwatts. All right. Minus 65 dB milliwatts, it's a beautiful thing. Minus 75 or greater, you're fine. You're fine. You may not get the best VoIP call quality, but you'll still talk just fine. VoIP vendors want minus 65. Avaya, Cisco, Vocera, whoever, they all say, I'll give me minus 65. That's a hard number to come by sometimes, unless you put an access point in every room. Greater than minus 75, no worries. Greater than minus 80, okay, web and email, okay, but don't plan to have that be your replacement for your wired network if you're down at minus 80. It'll work just fine in a hotel or a resort, but not in a classroom, not in an office building. You want that minus 75. And this is going to go off the page. Less than minus 80, you're on the edge. You're really on the edge. Less than minus 90, it's not going to work for you. And the fact that some vendors' equipment is spec'd to communicate down to minus 98, Strict Systems has a radio that'll go minus 102 as their spec RSSI, received signal strength indication. And that's true in the lab. Because the other component is the noise. The signal-to-noise ratio. Signal-to-noise ratio, well, first of all, it's a ratio. There's a division sign in there. But it's a logarithm. So the division turned to logarithm. Math majors in here, if I want to divide using logarithms, what do? I subtract, yeah. 100 minus 52. The signal-to-noise ratio is 48 dB. Now, it's actually a ratio with division, but it's great. The dB, the logarithmic representation means we don't have to think about that. We just subtract. This is the ratio of the signal to the noise. And what I need is, I need the signal to be at least 20 dB greater than the noise for reliable operation. To recover the signal from the background noise, I want the signal to be 20 dB greater than the noise in Wi-Fi. By the way, in CDMA and cellular, you can have that flipped over. You can have noise that's 3 or 4 dB greater than the signal, and it can still be recovered. Different radio stuff. WiMAX will run down a little lower than that, 7 dB signal to noise. But for Wi-Fi, as soon as the noise and the signal get within 20 dB of each other, I start having concerns. If I'm less than 15 dB signal to noise, these two numbers are less than 15 dB apart, you're going to have a problem. And if it's less than 10, you're going to have to fix something. It's not going to work for you. Less than 15, you might get away with it. Less than 10, you won't get away with it. Minus 100, that means you're at the lower limit of the ability of the WIN PCAP adapter to recover the noise, because it is not a spectrum analyzer, neither is air magnet, neither is anything that isn't a spectrum analyzer. In other words, the 802.11 chipset is not measuring power spectral density. It is not measuring the energy in the air. Actually, one of the ways that it works is, anybody familiar with the term Barker code? Who's never heard of Barker code? Don't be ashamed, raise your hand. You should be ashamed.
You haven't taught us yet.
That's right. Instead of just sending a bit as some kind of jiggling of the electromagnetic signal, the way I do on an Ethernet network, for example, the way I send an electromagnetic signal, it either represents a 1 or represents a 0. Manchester encoding. differential Manchester encoding. Wow, I had to pull those out. Okay. In the wireless environment, I use a code word. And the code word is like this. And I don't know it off the top of my head. I'm going to make something up. It's 11 bits long, though. And if I send you 111,000, 111,01, and that's not the code. I don't know but there's a sequence. If I send you that sequence, it means I'm sending you a 1. And if I send you a different sequence, it means I'm sending you a 0. So 11 bits are sent to represent 1 bit. And they don't call those 11 bits bits, because it would be too confusing to say bits and bits. It's just like you don't call anything a sub network. But you're willing to talk about CIDR, or classless internet domain routing, where you keep chopping the network up. Well, if each one's a sub-network, right? Well, isn't it a sub-network? And then there's a sub-network? No, we gloss over that. We just keep, right. It's 10/8, 10/12, 10/14, but each one's a subnet. Okay. The 11 things are called chips. Not to confuse Amdel or Intel. And the thing is called a chipping code. So I send an 11 chip code to represent 1 bit. And it's a different chipping code for representing a 0 and a 1. And I don't do that all the time, but there's parts of this. If you know what I'm talking about, you'll know that I'm leaving some things unsaid here. Bottom line is this. If I send you the chipping code and you can recover all 11 chips out of a bit, then you algorithmically say, I don't have any noise. On the other hand, if you can only recover 10 of the 11 chips out of the bit, then you start algorithmically saying, oh, I think I have some noise. And so one of the mechanisms, and by the way, beacon frames are sent with packets that use a chipping code. And so one of the mechanisms for an 802.11 chipset to report noise is by algorithmically looking at the result of the successful recovery of the chipping code. It can still recover the bit, because the chipping codes are, all I need is 1 bit to guess at the chipping code, because I know which position it's in. But that would be noisy. So this noise that's reported by Wireshark or AirMagnet or any other tool or Cisco AeroNet utility or anything that uses an 802.11 chipset, it is an algorithmic assessment of noise, not a true power spectral density measure that a spectrum analyzer would do. So minus 100 just means it's at the bottom. You can't measure, can't guess at anything below that. You'll also know that if you do have a problem that you go, I'm down here, sometimes I see 13, sometimes I see 20 dB of signal to noise, sometimes I see 9. I think I might have a noise problem. I don't see any microwave ovens. I'm not within 5 miles of an airport that uses airport surveillance radar. Large aircraft coming in, when they come in and they think they might have to go around when the weather is down, they leave their airborne radar on in the radome in the front of the aircraft. And that will affect the high end of the 2.4 gigahertz band if it happens to sweep right over your house if you're on the approach path. Weird stuff. Do you think, I don't know, where's this noise coming from? That's when you get a spectrum analyzer. And you go looking for the noise characteristics, or you call us and we come out with a spectrum analyzer, or whatever. You call your friend. Okay. Those are the 3 pieces that you look at.
By the way, you weren't that far off from the code.
Well, what's the code?
111 minus 1 minus 1
Right.
minus.
Yeah. Barker code. Good. It's good. You'll get to be one of the few that get to help me bang the erasers after class. All right. So I go to look for normal behavior. I go to look for the behavior. There we go. Probe request, probe response, acknowledge, authenticate, associate, and then some data. Yep, that looks normal to me. Probe, authenticate, associate, and some data. And you will know what looks normal because you will go home and look at normal networks. So you can't use Wireshark to troubleshoot a problem unless you know what it's supposed to look like when it's operating normally. So the bulk of using Wireshark is going to be looking at normal networks and walking through to understand what's it supposed to look like. Because otherwise, how could you? I can't make sense out of all these packets unless you know what to expect.
Is the EAP, is that just represented as data? Is that authentication? Is that
No, there's actually an EAP protocol type. It'll say EAP.
Okay.
Yeah, EAP-all.
Send update. So I'm scanning the network now. What type of frame should I be looking for to see what you're talking about there? I mean, I'm just scanning the current network.
Okay, so first of all, you're probably going to see almost all beacon frames.
What protocol is that?
It'll say
Actually,
beacon.
He's not running AirPCAP.
Yeah.
Oh, what are you looking
He's
at?
just looking off his normal NAC. He won't see the beacon.
The management.
Oh, right. Okay, I see. You got a Mac. So Mac does a cool thing. If you're capturing with Wireshark from your wireless adapter on the Mac,
Yes.
it is going to acquire LLC packets that come up through the stack, but it cannot reach down into the 802.11 driver and pull the 802.11 data out.
Okay.
That's being handled by the chipset, by the 802.11 chipset.
All right.
And there's no way around that. That's where the WinPCAP adapter has a wireless chipset that is in what's called RF monitor mode that allows the driver to reach down and acquire beacon frames and control and management frames. So all you're seeing is the traffic. I shouldn't say all you're seeing. What you're not seeing is 802.11. You're seeing traffic that has been de-encapsulated from 802.11 and passed up the stack to Wireshark.
Okay.
So you don't see beacon frames.
So if I run the AirCap
Yes.
adapter
Yes.
on the Mac,
Yes.
it will enable me to see.
Yes.
That's a Windows only.
Is it a Windows? Is the PCAP adapter Windows only?
Windows only, right?
So
Right now it's Windows only. So will it run under virtual PC?
Just
Yeah,
the-
Parallels 4.
Okay.
Worked on VMware.
Be on VMware? Yeah. Okay.
there's also open source stuff for other platforms that'll do pretty much the same thing if you've got the right chipset.
Yes. Yes.
It's all in the drivers.
Okay, so where do I go with this then? I got this stuff. Now we got the customer telling us there's a problem. So I go out and I capture from the network. One of the first things that I will do in a troubleshoot is I would like to look at the beacon frames. Because I want to see, that will disclose to me everybody that thinks they are an access point. It will also disclose if there are peer-to-peer networks. It's just, I want to see who's beaconing. So I'll find a beacon frame, go into the detail, right-click and apply as a selected filter. Now I'm looking at just beacon frames. When I do that, I want my time display to be seconds since the previous packet. I want to see my interframe spacing of beacon frames. Why? Because I know it's about 100 milliseconds from a given access point. Oh, I went the wrong way. Sorry. Okay. Now, I'll show you a thing that I like to do. And I do this with TCP also, same thing. Filter on TCP on a connection and export and look at delta times. Look at the time between packets. So if you export to a file as a CSV file with that timestamp turned on, right? File export to a file, set it as a CSV file as displayed. And then you graph it. Graph the times. Now see, here's the time. 104, 104, 104, 104. Yeah, okay, that's I said about 100. There's some variability in there. That's good enough. and I graph it. And immediately I am concerned. Because I see out of all these packets, out of these 8,000 packets that are out there, right here around packet 1427, there's this big, oh, it's about 18 seconds. That's the same thing the customer told me. Huh. All right. See, now we're gonna hit it. We're gonna hit it pretty quick here. So I go out and I look at that. I look at the beacons. I came down here to about that packet, and I start looking, and sure enough, there's the delta. Stopped beaconing. Well, okay, Mr. Customer, you weren't lying to me. You were telling me the truth, which isn't. I mean, they don't consciously. You weren't confused. It's true. 18 seconds, it shut off. Well, now I know that between 5854 and 5190 there was some issue going on, so let's go back and I'll turn the whole trace on, and I say this. You walk through the trace. Once you have discovered the point where the anomaly occurs, you now start walking forward until you hit the anomaly to see what led up to it, and you walk beyond that to see what happened during the anomalous situation. Why was the frame transmitted? What was the expected response? And did you get it? And so why was the frame transmitted? That may involve going back to a vendor and saying, why did this particular device driver do this particular thing, whatever. If you don't know, if you have isolated the point of failure, once you've isolated the point of failure, now it's a question of understanding the behavior leading up to the failure and understanding the behavior during the failure scenario. But you have your syllabus. It's the packet level trace. Why did this occur? This is what was expected. And once you find a departure from the expected response, you either found a manifestation of the problem or you discovered that there's something outside your protocol analysis experience. You bring somebody else in. But you've nailed it right there. Let's do it. This is the last beacon frame. Highlighted is the last beacon frame. And the next one wasn't way down here. So this is during the failure mode. And let's see. So 8A is our access point. And the next thing I see is this station, 24F6, broadcast a probe request. It was a wireless client broadcasting a probe request. All right, what's the expected thing when you see a probe request?
Response.
Probe response. Do we see a probe response?
Yes.
Why does that bother you?
Because it's not beaconing.
Because the access point is in failure mode right now. It's not beaconing. The access point has stopped beaconing. Why is it responding to probe requests? Got a request to send. Access point comes back clear to send. And there's data here, but look at this. He sends this data. Access point sends back, but he retransmits. The access point is not sending 802.11 ACKs for data. As you start walking through this, you see the client sends, the access point will send data to the client will act. But when the client sends data, the access point will not act. And this goes on like this. And then 18 seconds later, the access point starts beaconing again, everything's normal. Meanwhile, all the TCP sessions have died and the client has died and the person, even though they've never disassociated, but the user doesn't know that because all their sessions are dead. As far as they're concerned, they're knocked off the network. And this was the point where I said, guys, I don't know. Had the 5 Cisco engineers, had the 5 customer engineers, had our RF people. I don't know why these brand new Cisco 802.11n access points that nobody has a lot of experience with the new 11n software and the wireless LAN controller, I don't know why they are doing this. But we've isolated the problem. It is absolutely a behavior that is internal to the access point. It has nothing to do with the network. It's something internal to the access point, at which point one of the Cisco guys went, wait a minute. Thought about it. What makes the access point stop beaconing for a consistent time period? So we posed a question. The Wireshark trace led us to a question that could be reasonably posed. Well, in the Cisco world, radio resource management and the configuration of the Cisco wireless controller, the WISM boards, and the auto RF power setting and channel controls, all of those things are very clever. And they're part of the competitive landscape. Vendors like Aruba and Colubris and HP and Motorola, and everybody competes. They have their own versions of this kind of thing. And this was new software for the 11N support for the controller. One of the things that a wireless LAN controller can do, and again, this is true with Cisco and most of the major wireless LAN players that have wireless controllers, access points have varying degrees of functionality or utility as rogue detectors or air monitors to look for rogue access points and scan the channels. And so I could configure an access point to be a dedicated air monitor, to be a dedicated sensor. Or I could say, look, just spend 10 milliseconds out of every minute and take a quick scan and do that and work your way through. And after a few hours, you will have worked your way through all the channels. And maybe you're going to stumble upon somebody that put in a rogue access point. So it's a configurable thing. What percentage of time is to be spent searching for rogues? And what percent the rest of the time you're actually an access point? In addition, the configuration, in addition that setting, whether it's 10 milliseconds out of every minute or 1 second out of every 10, is how quickly do you want to identify the presence of a rogue device? So if I'm Sandia Labs or if I'm Lawrence Livermore Labs, I'm going to have dedicated air monitors. And if I'm a high school, then maybe I do 1 second out of a minute. And if I'm a resort hotel, fine, I can do 10 milliseconds out of 10 minutes just to do my channel setting, just to see if any channels need changing. Well, the default for the new wireless LAN controller software was to spend time looking at not just the channels that were part of the country standard, not just the country channels for North America, all channels, and to dwell on each channel for 10 milliseconds. And so, as soon as they brought and I even forget, there's the WLC, the wireless LAN controller, but then there's the Meta controller over the top of multiple Cisco wireless LAN controllers. And we see that same architecture in Aruba and Colubris and Motorola, where there's a controller that controls access points. Then there's a Meta controller over the top that provides the umbrella management. Well, the individual controllers were configured properly. It was the default setting in the Meta controller that told the access points to scan all channels. And so after 3 minutes, the access point went off in scanning mode. And that was what accounted for the behavior. And at the end of it all, it was simply a matter of them reconfiguring and pushing new profiles out to the access points. But the process leading up to that started with, the network doesn't work. Sure enough, every few minutes, 20 seconds, the thing is down. Why is it down? We look with Wireshark. We look at the behavior. We know what the normal expected behavior was. We follow through to the point where the behavior goes weird. Then we ask the question, why did it do that? And either we know, or in my case, I didn't know, but I was able to isolate and describe the problem, and the Cisco engineer went, wait a minute, let me look at that configuration. And maybe in the background they went, who did that? Thank you.
Just a quick question. If it was scanning something else for rogue access points, why does it respond to probe requests if it's on another channel listening?
That I don't know.
Okay.
That I don't know. Yeah. I don't know why.
It was there just long enough to hear it.
Yeah.
And then that's it.
Yeah, and I like that. I like that. But I'll tell you, I'll comment on that. And see, we just agreed. Yeah, it was there long enough. And I'll leave you with something you take home. It's called the emperor's nose. See, when you say it was there long enough, and I agree with you. And so the answer is, it was there long enough.
Okay.
And then that's the emperor's nose. Here's what that means. There's an old parable. In ancient China, the emperor was considered so holy that the common man was not allowed to look at him. There arose a question as to how long the emperor's nose was. And to answer the question, they asked 100 people how long they thought the emperor's nose was, and they took the average. And that speaks to how we as engineers, addressing an unknown problem, where none of us really have any facts, but we're all smart. And we sit around, just like we just did, and we talk it through, and we come away going, I know this is how it has to work. It's got to work like this. It's got to be, it had enough time during the scan to be able to respond to that. And it's great. But in the back of your mind, and I do that, and we all do that, and it's good. And if we're clever and we're smart, we come up with correct answers. If we're not, we come up with crazy answers, like the emanations from the planet Venus. But always be aware when you're doing this thing that I call the emperor's nose. When you and a bunch of other people, and none of you really have a clue, you're all guessing, but you're all smart. So and it's totally a valid thing. Your guesses might be absolutely correct. But always remember when you are actually emperor's nosing a solution. So to know what you know, you think you know, so you can know how to know what you don't know. To understand the RF behavior and understand the expected 802.11 behavior. Understand at layer 2 and layer 3 what's going on, which is part of capturing and looking at the trace with Wireshark. You capture the problem then, and you go through the trace until the trouble point is identified. And sometimes that involves capturing a working scenario and a failure scenario, and comparing the two side by side so that you can see the point at which the failure scenario deviated from the working scenario. From there you pose a troubleshooting question. This is what it did. Why did it do that? And that brings us to the end of how Wireshark saved the WLAN.